A millionaire was on the brink of fainting from exhaustion and dehydration when a little girl suddenly approached him and offered him a cold bottle of water, which instantly revived him. But when the girl revealed she had used her entire lunch money to buy the water, the millionaire did this and made everyone cry. Arthur Pendleton loosened his silk tie. At 65, he owned half of the high-rises in Manhattan, but couldn't manage the air conditioning system in his own Mercedes. The car sat motionless on Queens Boulevard. The scorching midday heat beat down on the glass. Arthur felt his chest tighten. He pushed the car door open and stepped onto the street. "I'm going to find a drink.
I'm not waiting in this heat. I'll walk. Sir, the car will be ready soon."
Arthur left his driver behind. He walked on the cracked sidewalk heading toward a small coffee shop.
This heat is unbearable.
The blaring car horns made his head spin even more. His phone vibrated repeatedly in his vest pocket. It was the chief counsel. "Listen to me. I don't care what price the competition is pushing. This merger has to succeed. If we lose that piece of land, the entire investment fund will collapse." "Do you understand?" Arthur barked into the phone. He stood directly under the blazing sun, arguing over multi-million-dollar figures. Thirst left his throat parched. When the call ended, Arthur's vision suddenly blurred. He staggered, and his phone slipped from his hand, falling to the ground. Arthur realized he had walked too far from the car, and his wallet was still in the glove compartment. He approached a vendor's stall, gripping the wooden countertop tightly. "Sell me a bottle of water. I left my wallet in the car. I'll pay you right away." The vendor glanced at Arthur's expensive but sweat-stained suit, then shook his head. "The rule here is cash and carry, old man. No cash, no water." Arthur gasped for breath, his legs failing him. Just as he thought he was about to collapse, a chill touched his hand. A bottle of spring water, still beaded with condensation, was offered to him. Its owner was a tiny girl, her hair messy and her clothes worn out. Clara looked at him with big, worried eyes. "Take it, sir. I saw you were about to fall." Arthur took the bottle, twisted off the cap, and drank it down. The cool sensation running down his throat brought him back to his senses. He looked at the grimy child in front of him. "Thank you, dear. What's your name? How much does this water cost?" "I'm Clara. It's $3, sir. That was my lunch money, but I'm not as thirsty as you are." Arthur was stunned. This child had used her last bit of money to save a stranger. At that moment, the driver rushed over, handing Arthur his leather wallet. He immediately pulled out a $100 bill and offered it to the little girl. "Keep this money, dear, for your kindness." Clara looked at the bill, then backed away, shaking her head. "I can't take it. The water was only $3. I'm not selling it for $100. The little girl's unwavering integrity made Arthur feel ashamed. A millionaire like him always thought money could buy anything, but this child was teaching him a lesson in self-respect. He got some change from the driver, giving Clara a $5 bill instead. "Then take $5, $3 for the water, and $2 for you to buy an extra candy bar, okay?" Clara smiled, a radiant smile that lit up her smudged face. She took the money, bowed, and quickly ran into the dark alley between the abandoned factory buildings. Arthur stood motionless. He clenched the rejected $100 bill, feeling a strange current run down his spine. This slum was no place for a child like her. "Don't start the engine. Just slowly follow that little girl for me." Arthur got into the car, his eyes fixed on the small figure disappearing deep into the dark alley. The Mercedes rolled slowly, its tires crunching on the loose gravel, a sound out of place among the peeling old brick buildings. Arthur sat in the back seat, his eyes glued to the small figure as it vanished into the apartment building at number 215. The building sign was crooked, looking as if it would fall off any moment. He memorized the number, then pulled out his phone. and called Henderson the private investigator he had trusted for the past 10 years. "Henderson, I need information on apartment 4, B215 Oak Street. Who lives there, their source of income. I want a detailed report within 24 hours. "Understood, Mr. Pendleton," Henderson replied curtly, never asking unnecessary questions. That was why he was paid well. The next day, Arthur tossed his luxury suit into the corner of the closet and put on a plain windbreaker. He swapped the Mercedes for a quickly rented old Ford to remain inconspicuous, then parked across the street facing Clara's apartment building. He ignored the frantic calls from his office due to the chairman's sudden absence. He needed to see what was happening with his own eyes. It was noon. The balcony door of apartment 4B opened. A woman in her 30s stepped out wearing a cheap but gaudy pink silk negligee. It was Loretta Jenkins. She stretched and yawned deeply, lit a cigarette, and took a long drag, exhaling a thick cloud of smoke into the air. After finishing the cigarette, she casually flicked the butt onto the sidewalk, then went back inside. A few minutes later, the main door of the building opened. Clara emerged. The tiny girl was struggling to drag a black garbage bag nearly as big as herself. The heavy bag scraped along the street. Clara had to use both hands, straining to pull it to the public dumpster on the corner. On the balcony, Loretta still stood looking down, making no effort to help her eyes, as indifferent as if she were watching a stranger. Arthur's phone vibrated. An email from Henderson arrived. The report appeared on the screen, cold and cruel. Clara's mother had passed away from cancer 2 years ago. Loretta was her aunt, the legal guardian. The only source of income for both was social assistance and a small insurance payout designated for Clara. But the financial report showed that as soon as the money hit the account, it was completely withdrawn at casinos or liquor stores. Meanwhile, Clara's school records were filled with notes from teachers, unexcused absences, unpaid lunch fees, clothing too thin for winter. In the afternoon, Clara returned from school. She stood in front of the door of apartment 4B, knocking. Silence. Clara knocked a little harder, then pressed her ear to the door. Still no answer. Loretta had gone out to meet friends and forgotten to leave the key, or perhaps she simply didn't care how her niece would get into the house. Arthur waited for a cry, or at least a look of panic from a 9-year-old locked outside. But no. Clara sighed a painful, resigned sigh. She took off her backpack, pulled out her books, and sat on the cold concrete steps of the apartment hallway. Under the flickering yellow light, Clara began doing her homework. She clutched her stomach, which was growling with hunger, trying to focus on the numbers. That image hit Arthur right in the chest. It brought back memories of himself 60 years ago. A skinny boy named Arthur, sitting and waiting for his father on the front porch during cold winter nights, telling himself he had to study hard to escape poverty. He understood that loneliness. It corroded a person more than hunger. It was completely dark. A taxi pulled up with a screech. Loretta stumbled out, swaying the smell of cheap liquor so strong Arthur felt he could smell it even in the enclosed car. She swayed as she climbed the stairs. Seeing Clara huddled on the steps, Loretta offered no word of concern. She frowned, giving Clara's leg a slight kick, as if she were a rock in the way. "What are you doing sitting here trying to trip me to my death?" Loretta slurred, her abrasive voice echoing through the empty hallway. "Get out of the way, dit-il." Clara quickly gathered her books, pressing against the wall to let her aunt pass. Loretta struggled to fit the key into the lock, opened the door, and walked straight inside, leaving the door ajar. Clara shuffled in after her, closing the door. Arthur sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. Rage boiled in his blood. He had thought about sending an anonymous check, an amount large enough to change their lives. But now he realized that would be pointless. If he sent money, Loretta would squander it on alcohol and flashy clothes, and Clara would still be sitting hungry on those cold steps. Money in the hands of a heartless person is only a tool for them to become lazier. Just minutes after the aunt and niece went inside the light in apartment 4, B went out. There was no sound of clattering dishes, no smell of food cooking. Darkness enveloped the window. That meant there was no dinner. Clara would go to bed with an empty stomach after giving up her lunch for him. "Enough," Arthur growled under his breath. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel. He pulled out his phone, dialing his personal assistant. "Martha, listen to me. Clear my entire schedule for Saturday morning. Don't ask why." Arthur looked up at the darkened window one last time, his gaze determined. He couldn't just stand by and throw money through the window anymore. He needed a meeting, a direct intervention. And he knew exactly where Clara would go on Saturday morning. Jerry's diner was loud with the clatter of cutlery and heavy with the smell of fried grease, a stark contrast to the quiet 5-star restaurants Arthur usually frequented. He sat at a small table by the window, his everyday clothes, though made of fine fabric, still making him look out of place among the working-class patrons. Arthur didn't mind the curious glances. He watched the sidewalk where the neighborhood children were starting to emerge on their day off. Just as the detective's report suggested, a familiar small figure appeared around the corner. Clara was walking toward the public library, the only place she could sit near a free heater on cold days. Arthur stood up, pushed the door open, timing his exit for when Clara was passing by. "Hello, kid. Still remember this thirsty old man?" Clara stopped, startled. She looked up at Arthur, her eyes wide with surprise, quickly changing to a shy smile. "Yes, I remember, sir. Are you feeling better?" "Thanks to your water, I came back to life," Arthur smiled, pointing to the diner behind him. "I was just about to go in for breakfast, but honestly, I hate eating alone. Old folks often feel lonely. Would you like to join me?" "My treat, consider it another way of saying thank you." Clara looked inside the diner, swallowing hard. The smell of pancakes and bacon was enticing. Her faint caution quickly dissolved before her empty stomach. I haven't eaten breakfast, but you don't need to thank me again, sir. Just think of it as helping an old man have some company," Arthur insisted, gently guiding her inside. When the plate of hot pancakes and fried eggs was brought out, Arthur noticed Clara's eyes light up. She ate ravenously, but still tried to be polite, holding her fork and knife carefully to avoid dropping crumbs on the table. Arthur sipped his coffee, his eyes resting on the frayed cuff of her sleeve and her worn-out split canvas shoes. Winter was coming, and the child was still dressed so lightly. "How are you doing in school?" Arthur asked casually. Clara quickly swallowed a bite of egg, then eagerly shared. "I like math the most, sir. Numbers are so interesting, they never lie. But my grade this term isn't very good." "Why is that? Are you having trouble understanding the lessons?" "No, I understand everything." Clara lowered her gaze to her plate, her voice fading. "But the teacher assigns homework on the computer, and Aunt Loretta's computer is broken. Plus, the advanced workbook is too expensive, and my aunt said that money is more important for food." Arthur tightened his grip on the coffee mug. A bright child held back simply because she lacked a few dozen dollars for a book, while her aunt gambled away money on liquor. He cleared his throat, regaining the composed expression of a businessman. "Listen, Clara, I'm an investor. I like to invest in good people. Your act of buying water for me the other day shows you have wonderful character." He took out a napkin, pulled out a pen, and scribbled a few lines on it. "I have a personal scholarship fund called the Education Assistance Fund. I'd like to award it to you. This fund will directly pay the school for all your books, uniform, and lunch money. No middlemen, no cash given out." Clara looked up, her eyes welling up with tears. "Really, sir, but I didn't do anything big." "You were kind. This world lacks kindness, so it is very valuable. This is not charity. This is a reward." Arthur emphasized, his voice serious yet warm. "But there's a condition. Every Saturday morning we will meet here for breakfast. I need to check on your study progress. Do you agree?" "I agree. I promise I'll study very hard." The meal ended with 2 sausages and a portion of toast left on Clara's plate. She hesitated, then waved to call the waitress over. "Ma'am, could I please have a takeout container?" Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you full? Go ahead and finish it." "No, I'm very full." Clara quickly packed the food into the box. "I want to bring this back for Aunt Loretta. She often gets headaches in the morning and usually can't get up to cook. With this, she'll feel better." Clara's innocence and misplaced devotion pained Arthur's chest. She was worried about the person who starved her. He nodded, suppressing a sigh, watching the girl clutch the food container like a treasure. Clara said goodbye and hurried out the door, heading toward the dilapidated apartment building, believing this breakfast gift would please her aunt. Arthur stood up to pay his heart heavy. Just then, his phone vibrated in his pocket. A picture message from Detective Henderson. The photo was taken through the window of apartment 4B. Loretta was standing in the middle of the room holding Clara's old textbooks and throwing them straight into the trash. Right next to her on the table were 2 boxes of brand new high-heeled shoes, their seals just broken. The accompanying text message was brief. She needed the closet space for the new shoes she bought. Arthur stared at the screen, his thumb pressing hard against the glass. His help had just begun, only to be trampled by someone else. This conflict was no longer about charity. He needed to remove the tumor clinging to Clara's life. Aunt Loretta's mask had fallen, revealing a greedy heart. Would Arthur's plan be fast enough to protect Clara from this tumor? If you find the story engaging, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons, and let's continue. A few days later, things went sideways when Loretta entered Clara's room. She stood amidst the mess in Clara's bedroom, holding the thick cream-colored business card she'd found tucked between the pages of a math book. Arthur Pendleton's name was embossed in black ink below it, his personal phone number, and the logo of the investment group. She flipped the card over and over her thumb, stroking the expensive paper stock. The anger over the books taking up space quickly vanished, replaced by a calculating smile on her heavily made-up face. She had planned to throw all these books away, but not anymore. This wasn't trash. This was a winning lottery ticket. Loretta pulled out her phone and dialed the number. Her usual shrill voice disappeared, replaced by a sugary, almost fake tone. "Hello, is this Mr. Pendleton's office? I'm Loretta, Clara's aunt. I'm very concerned to see her bringing home expensive gifts from strangers. I think we need to meet for the sake of this poor child's future." The meeting was set at Le Coucou, a luxurious cafe in the heart of Manhattan, where a glass of water cost as much as an ordinary person's entire meal. Arthur chose this location intentionally. He wanted to use its opulence, order, and class to pressure Loretta, making her feel insignificant the moment she walked in. Arthur sat up straight, his hands resting lightly on the marble table. Beside him was Martha, his secretary of 20 years. Martha was a middle-aged woman with neatly pinned-up hair, horn-rimmed glasses resting on the bridge of her nose, and a tablet always ready in her hand. She was there to be a witness and to remind Arthur not to let emotion override reason. Loretta arrived 30 minutes late. When she walked in, the elegantly dressed patrons around them subtly frowned. Loretta wore an overly tight dress draped with a cheap shedding faux fur coat. Dangling from her hand was a knockoff LV handbag with a crooked logo. She held her head high, trying to act like she belonged, but the way she glanced at the prices on the menu gave everything away. Sorry for the delay. Loretta pulled out a chair and sat down without waiting for an invitation. The traffic in the city is terrible. A single mother like me is always racing against the clock. You are not a single mother. You are the legal guardian. Martha interjected, her eyes never leaving the tablet screen. And traffic was very light today. Please order a drink. Loretta paused for a second, the smile frozen on her lips. She ordered the most expensive white wine, then turned to Arthur, batting her thick fake eyelashes. Mr. Pendleton, I deeply appreciate your concern for Clara. That child is my whole world. Since my sister passed, I've sacrificed all my youth to raise her. But you know life is so difficult. Arthur nodded slightly, signaling her to continue. That's why I wanted to meet you. Loretta lowered her voice, trying to conjure a look of distress. Our apartment, it's falling apart. The water pipe just burst yesterday, flooding the whole place. The roof leaks every time it rains. Clara has been coughing all night because of the dampness. The doctor said the child needs a better living environment. She paused, glancing at Arthur for a reaction, then delivered her final blow. I called a contractor for an estimate. They said it would cost about $5,000 for a complete overhaul. I know you're a good man, sir. You wouldn't want your little benefactor to sleep in a puddle, would you? If you could assist with this cash amount, I promise I'll use every penny to fix the house for Clara. $5,000. A nice round figure, and enough for Loretta to shop to her heart's content for a few months. Arthur said nothing. He gestured to Martha. The secretary placed a thin stack of papers on the table. Ms. Jenkins, Arthur said, his voice calm but cold as ice. This is a list of invoices I have paid over the past week. Tuition, school lunches, health insurance, and school supplies for Clara, all paid directly to the vendor. Yes, I know, but the house, regarding the water pipes and the roof, Arthur cut her off. I own 3 construction companies in New York. I will send my best maintenance crew to your apartment tomorrow morning. They will fix everything broken, replace the pipes, and even repaint the walls if needed. My company will cover all material and labor costs. The smile vanished from Loretta's face. Her eyes widened, but not with joy, but with alarm. No, there's no need for such trouble, Loretta stammered, wringing her hands. You can just give me the money. I know a handyman. The price will be much lower. If you send strangers to my house, I won't feel comfortable. I don't deal in cash, Ms. Jenkins. Arthur looked her straight in the eye. I deal in invoices and contracts. If the house is broken, I fix the house. I don't give money. Loretta realized her avenue for getting money through house repairs was blocked. She pressed her lips together, her face starting to flush with suppressed anger. She downed her glass of wine in one gulp, then changed her tactics. She was no longer playing the role of the suffering aunt. She switched to the tone of someone demanding their rights. Fine. If you don't want to fix the house, so be it. But what about me? Who do you think takes care of Clara every day, who cooks and does her laundry? I believe that is the legal guardian's responsibility, and you receive social assistance funds to do just that, Martha interjected, her voice sharp as a razor. Loretta glared at Martha, then turned back to Arthur, hissing, I need new clothes. Winter is coming, and I don't even have a decent coat to wear to Clara's parent-teacher meetings. If I look ragged, her friends will make fun of the child. You want to help Clara save face, right? $1,000. Give me $1,000, and I'll let you play the fairy godfather. Loretta's stark selfishness was exposed right there at the luxurious table. She didn't care about Clara at all. She only wanted to use the child as a hostage to extort money for her own vanity. Arthur sighed, disappointed but not surprised. He pushed the folder of documents toward her. Martha, bring out the commitment document. Petita. Martha took a sheet of paper from her briefcase, placing it in front of Loretta along with a fountain pen. "This is the commitment agreement for the Education Assistance Fund," Martha explained. "It clearly states that all support from Mr. Pendleton is exclusively for Clara Jones's educational and health needs. You need to sign here to confirm you understand that you have no right to request cash for personal use." Loretta looked at the paper as if it were a declaration of war. She realized she had lost. This man was too shrewd, too meticulous. She would never get a penny from his pocket to buy handbags or pay off gambling debts. Her anger exploded. Loretta jumped up her chair, crashing to the polished wood floor, making a loud noise that caused the entire cafe to turn and look. "Who do you think you are?" Loretta shrieked, dropping all pretense. "You think having money means you can do whatever you want? Are you trying to control my family? I want to help Clara." Arthur remained seated, his voice completely unshaken. "Sign the paper, Loretta." "I won't sign a darn thing." Loretta grabbed the glass of water and splashed it on the floor. "Listen to me, old man. Clara is my niece. I am her sole legal guardian. The law is on my side, not on the side of a rich old man who likes to meddle in other people's business. If you don't play nice, you'll never see the child again." Loretta snatched up her knockoff bag and stormed off. On the way out, she bumped into a server carrying a tray of drinks, spilling everything. But she didn't bother to turn back to apologize or compensate. She kicked the door open and walked out, leaving an awkward silence behind her. Martha picked up the unsigned commitment paper and put it back in her briefcase. She looked at Arthur with concern. "You know what she's going to do next. She's going to take it out on the child." Arthur watched Loretta's back disappear through the glass door. He knew it. He had just declared war on a person with no conscience, and Clara was in the war zone. "Contact the detective agency now, Martha." Arthur said, his voice dangerously low. "I want 24/7 surveillance on that apartment. I want to know where she goes, who she meets, and most importantly, I want to know when she starves Clara. We need evidence, and fast." Arthur's study in the penthouse apartment was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the regular ticking of the antique pendulum clock. Mr. Henderson, the aging detective with graying hair and a face etched with the lines of time, placed a stack of photos on the mahogany desk. He said nothing, just gently pushed them toward Arthur. Henderson's silence was more chilling than any detailed report. Arthur picked up the photos. They were images taken from a long-range surveillance camera positioned on the building opposite Loretta's apartment. In the photos, Loretta had just arrived home after the meeting at Le Coucou. She wasn't yelling or breaking things. She simply and silently opened Clara's shoe cabinet, took out the waterproof sneakers and the warm down jacket Arthur had bought her the previous week. Clara stood pressed against the wall corner, clutching the hem of her old dress, her eyes wide with fear. Loretta shoved all the new items into her own closet and locked it. "What did she say to the child?" Arthur asked, his eyes still on the photo. The long-range listening device picked it up clearly. Henderson replied, his voice deep and raspy. "She told her, 'Nice things like this are wasted on you. Save them for a special occasion. If you get them dirty, how will I pay the old man back?' Then she made the child take the old torn canvas shoes outside to throw out the trash. It was raining and cold at the time." Arthur clenched the photo in his hand. This was her punishment. No physical abuse, no marks on the skin, but it was far more cruel. Loretta was stripping a child of warmth and self-worth just to defy him. Arthur's phone vibrated. An automated email from the school's administration system. Notification student Clara Jones was absent from the Science Museum field trip. Reason parent did not sign the permission slip. Arthur threw the stack of photos onto the desk, picking up his phone to text Loretta. "I paid for the field trip and the lunch money for the trip. Why didn't you sign the paper?" The reply came almost instantly, accompanied by a fake smiley face emoji. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Pendleton. My mind has been spinning lately with the worry of bills and food. This leaky old house keeps me up at night, so I completely forgot about those trivial papers. If only my life was more comfortable, I'm sure my memory would be much better." It was an act of emotional blackmail, a negotiation over a child's joy. Arthur did not reply. He knew that if he conceded, Loretta would continue to hold Clara's experiences hostage to her bottomless greed. One more thing. Henderson flipped to the last page of the report. "About the food, I checked the household trash." The detective pointed to a photo taken inside the shared trash can on the 4th floor. Next to the expensive pizza boxes and fried chicken, the kind of fast food Loretta often secretly ordered for herself while Clara was at school, were wrappers from cheap instant noodles. "The refrigerator in the apartment is empty, sir. She eats good food outside or orders it for herself secretly while the child only has instant noodles and water. This neglect, it's very sophisticated. She doesn't let the child starve to death, but she keeps the child at a minimal level of survival." Saturday morning arrived. Arthur waited at Jerry's diner. The clock showed 8:30 a.m. Clara was never late. She always cherished these meals as a special occasion. Arthur looked out the window, his finger tapping nervously on the tabletop. Closer to 9 a.m., the diner door finally opened. Clara walked in. Arthur was shocked. She looked exhausted, as if she'd just recovered from an illness. Her big eyes were now deeply sunken, with dark circles clearly visible against her pale skin. She wore the thin old windbreaker, shivering from the cold. "Mr. Arthur, I'm so sorry," Clara mumbled, not daring to look him in the eye. "I overslept. Sit down first." Arthur pulled out a chair, waving for a server to bring a hot soup immediately. "Are you sick? Why do you look so tired?" Clara shook her head, taking the bowl of soup. The heat rising from it blurred her tearful eyes. She ate quickly, but her trembling hand caused the soup spoon to spill. "I'm not sick. It's just, I couldn't get into the house last night." Arthur stopped stirring his coffee. "What do you mean? Aunt Loretta came home late from a friend's birthday party," Clara said, her voice dropping. "She said she was so tipsy she accidentally broke the key in the lock and had to call a locksmith to replace the whole lock in the middle of the night. When I got back from my extra study time at the library, my key wouldn't open it anymore. I knocked, but she was sleeping too deeply to hear." "So where were you all night?" Arthur asked, trying to keep his voice from shaking with anger. "I sat in the hallway. I wrapped my coat around me and it wasn't too cold, sir. My aunt woke up near dawn to use the restroom and heard me knocking, so she let me in. I only got a little sleep, that's why I'm late." 4 hours. The 9-year-old child had to huddle in that apartment hallway filled with mice and trash in the middle of the night, all because of her guardian's deliberate accident. Loretta was playing a cat and mouse game, and Clara was the hapless mouse. She didn't hurt Clara physically. She simply deprived her of sleep safety and trust in her own home. "Eat, Clara. Eat a lot." Arthur pushed the plate of toast toward her, his heart wrenching. He wanted to take her away immediately to pull her out of that earthly nightmare. But he didn't have the legal right yet. Clara finished eating, but instead of staying to talk as she usually did, she looked at the wall clock with a panicked expression. "I have to go home now, sir." "Why the rush? We haven't even gone over this week's math homework." "I can't." Clara stood up, gripping her backpack straps tightly. "Aunt Loretta said she's tired today and needs rest. She gave me a list of chores to finish before noon. If I don't finish..." She hesitated, fear clearly visible in her eyes. "What happens if you don't finish?" "Then she'll be upset. She said she works hard to take care of me, so I can't be lazy. I have to hand wash the living room rug and clean all the balcony windows." Hand washing a rug, cleaning windows, tasks far too strenuous for a child, especially one who had just spent a sleepless night. "Let me drive you home." Arthur stood up, allowing no refusal. "I have the car, it will be faster than you walking." On the way back, Clara sat perfectly still in the old Ford. She didn't dare lean back against the seat as if afraid of getting his car dirty. Upon reaching the apartment building gate, Clara quickly got out of the car. "Thank you, Mr. Arthur. Please, don't be mad at my aunt. Maybe she's just really tired." She was still defending the person who tormented her. It was the survival mechanism of an abused child. They convince themselves that if they are better or more diligent, the adults will love them. Arthur watched the small figure with her head bowed, carrying the plastic bucket and heavy bag of detergent that Loretta had left waiting for her on the stairs. She climbed each step with difficulty, as if carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Arthur hadn't even started the car when his phone chimed with a message. It was Loretta's number. He opened it. No greeting, no thank you for her niece's breakfast. Just a link to a used car sales website. It was for a 2018 Honda Civic. Below the link was a short, cruel, and direct message. "The child would suffer less if I had a vehicle to drive her to school and outings instead of making her walk or wait outside at night like this. What do you think?" Arthur tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The car engine roared in anger as he slammed his foot on the gas pedal. Loretta Jenkins had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She thought Arthur Pendleton was a cash machine who could be intimidated. But she was wrong. She had just awakened a force willing to tear apart anyone who stood in the way of what he cherished. Arthur stared at his phone screen. The link to the used Honda Civic sales website remained there beneath Loretta's blatant, demanding message. He did not reply. His finger hovered over the delete button, pushing the conversation into the trash. To Arthur, silence was not surrender. It was an answer. He did not negotiate with extortionists, even if that person held the most valuable thing to him. But Arthur had underestimated the ruthlessness of a person backed into a corner. When she received no response, Loretta understood that she would not get a penny from Arthur's pocket without using stronger measures. In apartment 4, B Saturday morning began with an unusual, suffocating atmosphere. Clara woke up early as usual, eager to comb her messy hair and put on her old canvas shoes. She looked forward to breakfast, eager to see Mr. Arthur and show off her A- on her math test. But when Clara reached for the doorknob, she realized the door was locked from the inside. Her key was no longer on the hook. "Where do you think you're going?" Loretta's voice rang out from the sofa. She was sprawled out watching television, holding a mug of black coffee. I'm going to meet Mr. Arthur Auntie. Today is Saturday." "There is no Saturday anymore," Loretta said, her eyes never leaving the television screen. "From now on, you are forbidden from setting foot out of this house to see that old man." Clara was stunned. Her small shoulders slumped. "But why Auntie? He's a good person. He helps me pay for school." "A good person?" Loretta scoffed, a bitter laugh that made Clara shiver. "You're too naive, Clara. No one in this world gives anything away for free. He's a millionaire. You think he's idle enough to have breakfast with a dirt-poor girl like you out of the goodness of his heart?" Loretta sat up, looking straight into Clara's eyes, pouring every drop of venom into the child's impressionable mind. "He's just like your parents. At first, they promise love and everything else. But when you become a burden, when you make demands, or when he finds a new diversion, he'll toss you out without a second thought. He's bored and using you as a toy. Do you want to be abandoned again?" "No, Mr. Arthur isn't like that," Clara stammered, tears beginning to well up. "What do you know? I'm your aunt. I'm the only one who takes care of you when the whole world turns its back. I'm forbidding you from going out only to protect you. Now get in your room. I don't want to see your face until you wise up." Clara backed away, tears streaming down her face. Her belief was violently shaken. Could Mr. Arthur really abandon her like her aunt said? She ran into her room, closed the door, and retreated into the wardrobe, her only hiding place in this cold house. At Jerry's diner, the clock hands pointed to 9:30. Arthur's black coffee had long gone cold, a thin film floating on the surface. He still sat at the table by the window, his eyes fixed on the familiar street corner. Other children passed by, laughing and playing, but there was no sign of the small figure with pigtails and a large, ill-fitting jacket. The waitress came over, holding a pot of hot coffee. "Is the little girl not coming today, sir? That's strange. She never misses the blueberry pancakes." "She must be busy," Arthur replied, his voice calm, but his hand under the table was clenched tight. 10 o'clock, 10:30. Arthur stood up, placing money on the table. He couldn't sit still any longer. Clara's silence was a warning sign. Loretta had carried out her threat. The old Ford sped through the Queens streets, maneuvering through the narrow alleys toward the 215 apartment building. Arthur parked right in front of the building, ignoring the no parking sign. He quickly climbed the stairs, the sound of his dress shoes pounding on the concrete echoing his suppressed fury. 4th floor, apartment 4B. Arthur took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. He knocked. 3 decisive taps. There was no answer, but he could hear a loud reality show playing inside. "Loretta Jenkins, open the door," Arthur called out loudly. "I know you're in there." The television suddenly went silent. The hallway was enveloped in quiet. Then came the sound of shuffling footsteps approaching the door, but the door didn't open. Instead, Loretta's abrasive voice rang out, not talking to him, but screaming for the whole world to hear. "Go away right now, you pervert! Stop harassing my family!" Arthur froze. He frowned, knocking harder. "What are you talking about? I came to check on Clara. Did you ground the child just because I wouldn't buy you a car?" "Help, is anyone there?" Loretta shrieked, her voice falsely panicked. "This old man is stalking my niece. He's trying to break down my door. I told you to stay away from the child." The door of apartment 4A across the hall cracked open. An old woman poked her head out, her eyes full of suspicion. Then the door to apartment 4C opened. A large man stepped into the hallway, holding an empty beer bottle. "What's going on?" the neighbor asked, eyeing Arthur from head to toe with hostility. "This guy is bothering my niece," Loretta shouted through the thin wooden door. "He keeps following the child, tempting her with money. Now he's even come to my house and is pounding on the door. Please get him to leave. I'm so scared." Arthur looked around. The eyes of the building's residents changed. From curiosity to disgust and threat, Loretta had clearly sown seeds of doubt beforehand. In their eyes, Arthur was not a benefactor, but a sick, wealthy man preying on a poor child. "Hey, buddy!" The neighbor stepped closer to Arthur, exhaling a whiff of liquor in his face. "She told you to leave. Your kind isn't welcome here." Arthur stood tall, adjusting his vest. He didn't argue with the drunk, nor did he try to explain himself to the neighbors who were being manipulated. He knew that any rash action now would be the very trap Loretta had set. Arthur stepped right up to the door of 4B. He pressed his ear against the cold wood. Amidst the neighbors' murmurs and Loretta's gasping on the other side of the door, Arthur heard another sound. Very quiet, very weak, suppressed sobbing. Clara was right behind that door. She was hearing everything. Her aunt's lies, the neighbor's rejection. She was more afraid and alone than ever. Arthur closed his eyes, his hand placed on the door as if to transmit warmth inside. He wanted to burst the door open to pull Loretta out and toss her down the stairs. But he was a businessman, and more importantly, he needed to win this fight permanently, not just a single scuffle. He took a deep breath, speaking loudly enough for Clara to hear, but low enough to convey unwavering resolve. Clara, I know you're there. Listen to me. I will never abandon you. What your aunt is saying is untrue. I will come back, and next time I'll take you away. Be brave. I promise. Inside, the crying stopped for a moment, as if the girl was holding her breath to listen. Arthur turned around. The neighbor still stood blocking the way, his face aggressive. Arthur looked him straight in the eye, the cold, sharp gaze of a man who managed thousands of employees, causing the large man to unconsciously take a step back. Arthur walked down the stairs, back straight, head held high, leaving the malicious whispers behind him. He wasn't running away. He was retreating to prepare for a full-scale offensive. As soon as he got into the car and slammed the door shut, isolating himself from the chaos outside, Arthur pulled out his phone. His hand was still shaking with anger, but his voice when he answered the call was cold and firm as tempered steel. Thompson, it's me. Stop all charitable activities. I don't want to play the fairy godfather anymore. On the other end of the line, lawyer Thompson waited in silence. Prepare the legal documents to revoke Loretta Jenkins's guardianship. Mobilize all resources, detectives, medical records, school witnesses. I want her in court. The fight starts now. The legal battle officially began. Arthur would no longer hold back. Thank you for following Arthur and Clara's journey this far. Can justice prevail against the malicious rumors? Stay tuned for the final part. Arthur hung up after the call to lawyer Thompson, his hands still gripping the steering wheel of the old Ford. The next morning at the gate of Clara's elementary school, Loretta appeared earlier than usual. She no longer looked tipsy or disheveled, but wore light makeup and a seemingly distressed outfit. She stood among the crowd of parents waiting for their children, constantly dabbing her eyes with a tissue. You don't know how much I'm suffering. That rich old man keeps pursuing little Clara, using money and luxury items to corrupt her soul. He wants to tear me and my niece apart. The crowd began to murmur. Mothers pulled their children back when they saw Arthur's car parked far off. Their eyes looked at him not with curiosity, but with a mix of disgust and fear. Loretta's acting deepened. She sobbed about having to fight against a millionaire's influence to protect her orphan niece. Arthur got out of his car, intending to head toward the school gate, but dozens of suspicious eyes converged on him like a separating wall. Mr. Pendleton, please come into my office right away. Principal Miller stood on the school steps, his face strained with tension. Miller was a typical school administrator. He revered rules and feared anything that could tarnish the school's reputation. Arthur sat facing Miller in the office, which smelled strongly of wood polish. Miller clasped his hands together, not daring to look Arthur in the eye. Public opinion is extremely agitated, Mr. Pendleton. Miss Jenkins's accusations are very serious. To protect the educational environment, the school requires you to temporarily suspend all direct financial support. You are also not permitted near the school premises until there is an official conclusion from the authorities. Do you care more about the reputation of this school than the fact that a child is being neglected? Miller, Arthur said sharply, his pride deeply offended. I care about procedure. If you truly want what is best for Clara, let things quiet down. Your presence right now will only cause the child more distress. Arthur's official help was cut off in a single morning. But that wasn't all. Loretta had called Child Protective Services CPS. She accused Arthur of psychologically manipulating Clara. In apartment 4B, Loretta started a new act. She dragged Clara out of her room, tossing the nicest dress Arthur had bought the girl onto the bed. Put that on quickly. The social worker will be here soon. If you dare say anything bad about me, she'll take you to an orphanage immediately. They'll shave your head there, make you eat stale food and do hard labor. Do you want that? Clara trembled as she slipped her arms into the sleeves. She looked at her aunt, who was hastily cleaning up the empty liquor bottles and trash on the floor. Loretta set up a fake dining table with 2 slices of bread and a newly opened jar of jam. Remember, you get good food and a warm bed every night. I love you the most in this world. Say the wrong thing and you'll ruin everything. Arthur sat in his car 2 blocks away. Detective Henderson had just reported that the CPS worker had arrived. Arthur wanted to rush in to show them the truth behind that door, but lawyer Thompson had warned him over the phone. Arthur, you are a non-relative. If you appear now, Loretta will use it as evidence to accuse you of harassment. You must stay put. Ms. Vance, the CPS social worker, entered the apartment with a tired expression. She had dealt with dozens of cases this week and just wanted to finish quickly. She saw a tidy apartment recently given a superficial clean and a well-dressed child sitting obediently at the dining table. Hello, Clara. How is your aunt taking care of you? Do you usually get enough to eat? Clara looked at her Aunt Loretta, who was standing behind Ms. Vance, her hand tightly gripping her handbag in a silent threat. The image of the orphanage with stale food and a shaved head flashed in the child's mind. She's very good, ma'am. I always get enough to eat. Clara lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. Ms. Vance checked the refrigerator. Loretta had borrowed some food from the neighbors to put inside. She found no bruises, no evidence of abuse, and the child confirmed she was fine. Ms. Vance sighed in relief, made a note in her notebook, and closed the file. Everything seems stable. I will note that further monitoring is required, but there are no urgent signs at this time. Loretta escorted Ms. Vance to the door with the gentle smile of a devoted aunt. The moment the door closed, the smile vanished. She turned back and shouted at Clara, "Take that dress off right now, you useless child. I had to waste energy putting on that show for that old woman because of you." Loretta stripped the nice dress off Clara, threw her into the dark room with a stomach still growling from hunger, and then changed her own clothes to go celebrate her victory with her friends. Late afternoon, Arthur sat in Lawyer Thompson's office. The large room was brightly lit, but Arthur felt cold inside. Thompson walked in, placing a folder on the desk with a sigh. Bad news, Arthur. The CPS report concluded that the Jenkins family environment is completely stable. Clara gave a favorable statement about her aunt. This means we no longer have any legal grounds to request the revocation of guardianship or visitation rights. Arthur slammed the folder onto the desk, the rustling of papers echoing in the quiet space. He looked out the window where darkness enveloped the skyscrapers of Manhattan. The law only sees what people want it to see. They are abandoning that child to a cruel person. You lost the first round, Arthur, and without new evidence, you will lose Clara forever. Arthur said nothing. He stared at the photo of Clara that the detective had just sent. She was standing behind the dark window of apartment 4B, her eyes vacant, staring into the void. Arthur knew he wasn't just losing on the legal front. He was losing the soul of the child who had saved his life with a $3 bottle of water. He took out his phone, his finger trembling as he touched Henderson's contact. Follow Loretta Jenkins. Don't take your eyes off her for a second. She will slip up soon. Arthur stood by his office window watching the rain streak across the thick glass. Detective Henderson had just reported that Loretta hadn't left the house for 2 days, but the intuition of a seasoned businessman told him this was just the calm before the storm. Arthur felt like he was watching a sinking ship from afar, unable to reach out and help. That night, an old rattling pickup truck roared into the alley in front of the 4B apartment building. Rick stepped out, wiped the rain from his face, and pounded loudly on the door. Loretta opened it already, carrying 2 large bags filled with flashy clothes. The truck is cramped, Loretta. I told you I'm heading to Florida to start over, not to open a nursery. Rick leaned against the hood of the truck, staring intently at Loretta. You come alone, or stay here and rot with that kid. I'm not feeding another mouth. Loretta looked back at the dark hallway where Clara was huddled behind her bedroom door. She didn't hesitate. She rushed back into Clara's room, flipping the old mattress over. She found the small wallet Arthur had given the child inside, of which were a few small bills for spending money and the cash Arthur had secretly sent to pay the next month's electricity bill. Loretta put all of it into her handbag, leaving nothing behind. "Where are you going, Auntie?" Clara asked, her voice trembling as she saw her aunt's haste. "I'm going on a business trip for a few days to earn money for your food. Stay in the house, don't show your face outside for that old man to tempt you. If you need anything, go knock on Mrs. Higgins's door." Loretta lied without batting an eye, pushed Clara inside, and locked the main door. She pulled out her phone, sending a casual voice message to Mrs. Higgins. "Hey Higgins, watch the kid for a few days. I have to go out." She knew the neighbor was probably tipsy among her empty bottles and would never answer the phone, but she didn't care. Loretta climbed into Rick's truck. The pickup engine revved, spewing thick smoke, then disappeared into the white rain. Clara stood by the crack in the window, watching the distant red taillights of the truck fade away. She tried the doorknob, but it was locked tight. A day passed, then 2 days. On the second night, all the lights in the apartment went out. The power company had cut the electricity because the bill hadn't been paid. Darkness enveloped the damp space. Clara fumbled in the kitchen, but the refrigerator only contained 2 old bottles of water and a piece of dry bread that had started to mold. She drank the water to fill the hunger gnawing at her stomach. The rain outside continued to pour, blending with the sound of mice scurrying in the walls. "Auntie Mrs. Higgins," Clara called out, but only her own echo answered. She pressed her ear against the wall, separating her from Mrs. Higgins's apartment, hearing only the slurred snoring of the alcoholic woman. No one came. Clara realized she had been completely abandoned in this locked-in darkness. In her desperation and fear, Clara suddenly remembered the treasure Mr. Arthur had secretly given her one Saturday morning. It was an old, bulky phone he called the emergency phone. He had instructed her, "If anything makes you feel scared and no one is around, press the number 1. Clara trembled as she crawled into the wardrobe, the only place she felt a little warmth. She retrieved the phone from the bottom of a shoebox. The screen displayed a flashing red 2% like a final weak breath. Clara used her cold fingers to press the number 1. At that moment in downtown Manhattan, Arthur was sitting at the head of the table in a critical board meeting. Shareholders were intensely debating a multi-million-dollar merger. The meeting room was luxurious, stifling with numbers and ambition. Arthur's phone vibrated on the marble table. He intended to hang up, but when he saw the name displayed on the screen, his heart tightened. It was the signal from the old-fashioned phone he had prayed Clara would never have to use. Arthur picked up the phone, his hand slightly shaking. "I'm here, Clara." On the other end, the sound of wind whistling through the door crack blended with muffled sobs. "Mr. Arthur, I'm scared. Auntie is gone. The power's out. It's so dark. I'm so hungry." Clara's voice was a whisper so weak that she seemed unable to utter another word. Arthur felt her pain in that very instant. "Don't be scared, Clara. I'm coming right now. Do you hear me? You must—" The long, cold tone of a disconnected call rang out. The phone on the other end had run out of power. Arthur jumped up, knocking his high-back leather chair to the floor. The sound of the chair legs hitting the floor loudly resonated in the dead silence of the meeting room. "Mr. Pendleton, we haven't voted on the financial option yet." A bewildered shareholder spoke up. "To heck with your numbers," Arthur roared. He didn't bother gathering his documents, just stormed out the door. "I have a call that's more important than all of your lives combined." Arthur raced against time, leaving behind his multi-million-dollar real estate empire to head toward the dilapidated apartment building in Queens, where a small soul was fading away in the dark. A supreme fear surged in his heart. If he wasn't fast enough, he would lose Clara forever. The Mercedes sped through traffic like a black arrow. Arthur slammed the gas pedal to the floor, the speedometer needle jumping past the 100 mark. He no longer heard the blaring horns of protest or saw the changing traffic lights. His mind only held Clara's weak whisper. "Henderson, get the police to apartment 4B immediately. The child is starving inside. Force the door if necessary. I will take full responsibility." Arthur yelled into his phone's earpiece while fiercely turning the steering wheel with the other hand. He called Sergeant Miller, the officer in charge of the Queens area. Miller was a stickler for the law, but upon hearing Arthur's breathless voice on the phone, he understood the situation had surpassed ordinary paperwork. As Arthur ran up to the 4th floor, the apartment hallway was brightly lit with flashlights. Sergeant Miller and the building manager stood before the locked door of 4B. Miller nodded, signaling the locksmith to break the lock. The door burst open, crashing to the floor, releasing a thick, cold, musty odor. Flashlight beams cut through the absolute darkness of the apartment. The house was eerily silent. Arthur was the first to rush into the kitchen. "Clara, I'm here. Where are you?" He saw the refrigerator wide open, containing nothing but ice trays that had melted into water. Under the kitchen table, amidst scattered instant noodle wrappers, Clara lay curled up like a small, abandoned kitten. Her lips were blue, and her breath was as thin as a thread. Her hand still clutched the dead phone as if holding onto her last lifeline. "Oh my God, Clara." Arthur fell to his knees on the dusty floor. He took off his expensive custom-made suit jacket, wrapping it around the small, trembling body of the girl. Clara barely opened her eyes, her vision blurred from dehydration. When she recognized Arthur's familiar face, she could only let out a small sob before burying her head in his chest, weeping uncontrollably. That painful cry echoed throughout the dark apartment, causing even the most hardened police officers to turn away. Paramedics rushed in with a stretcher. They administered fluids and warmed her up on the spot. Arthur did not let go of Clara's hand for a second. He sat on the cold floor, tightly holding her small hand. The next morning, as the sun began to peek over the old buildings, the police were still securing the scene to collect evidence. Arthur sat on the old sofa, watching the officers take photos of the empty refrigerator and the stack of overdue utility bills. Just then, the sound of a key jiggling in the outer lock echoed. Loretta Jenkins walked in, her face pale and full of annoyance. She froze upon seeing the police surrounding the living room. She did not even glance at Clara, who was lying on the rescue cot. "What the heck is going on? Why did you break into my house? Where is the child?" Arthur jumped up, stepping forward to shield Clara. His eyes seemed to burn the woman in front of him. Loretta took a step back, but immediately regained her usual brazenness. "I was only away for a little while, taking care of family business. You people are overreacting. The child is lazy and wouldn't cook for herself. I didn't abandon her. She is my niece. I have the right to raise her however I see fit. Do you call locking a 9-year-old child in a house with no electricity and no food for 2 days taking care of family business?" Sergeant Miller stepped forward, holding a file. "I asked the neighbor to look after her." "It's her fault for not doing her job. You mean Mrs. Higgins, right?" Detective Henderson emerged from behind, holding an electronic device. "We tracked your boyfriend's vehicle. You had traveled to the Florida border before turning back right. You only returned because you realized your passport was at home, and without it, you couldn't run away any longer. Loretta's face turned white. She looked at the handbag in her hand where her passport lay. Mrs. Higgins also testified to us. She never received any direct request for help. We found bus tickets in your luggage in Rick's pickup truck. You plan to abandon the child permanently. No. You're making things up. Loretta screamed, trying to struggle free. Loretta Jenkins, you are under arrest for child abandonment and welfare fraud. The cold click of handcuffs rang out sharply. Loretta was escorted out under the gaze of the neighbors packed in the hallway. She continued to scream, blaming the circumstances, Clara, everyone but herself. Just then, Ms. Vance from Child Protective Services approached. She looked at Clara with pity, then turned to Arthur. Mr. Pendleton, we are obligated to take the girl to a temporary protective shelter according to procedure. Ms. Jenkins has lost custody, and the child needs to be protected by the state. Arthur tightened his arms around Clara. Never. I will not let the child go to another strange place after everything she's been through. You are not a relative. You have no legal right to keep the child. I don't care about your procedure. Arthur pulled out his phone, dialing a number straight to a family court judge he knew. Hello, Judge Harrison. This is Arthur Pendleton. I'm at apartment 4, B215 Oak Street. A child needs absolute safety. I'm requesting an emergency temporary guardianship order right here, right now. My lawyer is sending the evidence file to your office. After 10 minutes of intense argument over the phone and the intervention of his top legal team, Ms. Vance received an email from the court. She looked at Arthur with respect, then sighed in relief. The order has been approved. You have temporary guardianship while awaiting the official court hearing. Arthur picked up Clara. She had fallen asleep from exhaustion, but her hand still clutched the lapel of his suit jacket. He walked through the hallway, passing the police car that was taking Loretta away. The aunt glared at him, but Arthur no longer cared about her. To him, she was just a part of the dark past Clara had to leave behind. He gently placed Clara in the back seat of the luxurious Mercedes, closing the car door as if sealing off her access to the cruel old world. Arthur tightly held Clara's small, dry hand. Let's go home, Clara. This time we're truly going home. The car drove away, leaving the miserable apartment building behind. Arthur looked in the rearview mirror, seeing the early morning sun shining on the child's peaceful face. He understood that the legal battle was still long, but the most important battle to save Clara's spirit, he had won. At the final court hearing, Judge Harrison looked over his reading glasses and read the 10-page ruling. With stacks of evidence of neglect from the detective and the abandonment report from Sergeant Miller, Loretta Jenkins had no chance to deny the charges. She received probation and was completely stripped of her guardianship rights. Arthur squeezed Clara's hand, his breath relaxing when he officially became the girl's legal guardian. 6 months later, the Pendleton empire witnessed an unprecedented restructuring. Arthur sold off stakes in risky ventures, handing over the management of the investment fund to Martha. The man who once only cared about stock indices now frequently appeared at the supermarket. He stood by the food aisle, seriously reading the nutritional labels on every cereal box to choose the one with the least sugar for Clara. You manage thousands of employees, but you're stuck choosing a box of snacks, Martha often teased him. Arthur just laughed. He was busier taking Clara to and from school than with multi-million-dollar deals. Sunday morning, the penthouse apartment was filled with the smell of pancakes. Arthur fumbled by the stove, awkwardly flipping a pancake with a spatula. Sizzle. A pancake was burnt black, Clara stood next to him, laughing heartily. She was now healthy, her cheeks rosy and her eyes sparkling with joy. "You're even worse at flipping pancakes than I am. Come on, I'm making progress." Arthur also burst out laughing, pushing the ruined pancake aside. This cheerful sound was something his cold apartment had never had for decades. After breakfast, Arthur led Clara into his new study. The room that once housed multi-million-dollar contracts now had a small, colorful study nook with pencil boxes and her drawings. Right in the center of the luxurious mahogany desk, Arthur placed the only decorative item in the most prominent position. It was an elaborate glass frame wrapped in velvet. Inside was a $2 bill and a wrinkled old $1 bill. Clara looked at the money, then looked up and asked, "Why do you keep them so carefully? They only bought a bottle of water." Arthur sat down, pulling Clara into his lap, his eyes gentle. "No, Clara. To me, these $3 bought the most precious thing in the world. They bought back my humanity and brought me a family. You saved me from thirst, and you saved my old soul too." Clara smiled, burying her head on his shoulder. Arthur turned off the study light, and the two of them put on their coats and walked out the door. They had planned to fly kites in Central Park that afternoon. The penthouse door closed with a gentle click. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the $3 bill, making it shine like a priceless treasure. The painful past of apartment 4B was closed, making way for a future full of love and hope. The story is a testament to the miraculous power of selfless kindness. $3 might be a small sum to the rich, but it was everything to a poor child. Clara's humanity redeemed the dried-up soul of the millionaire Arthur, affirming that a person's true worth is not in their bank balance, but in their capacity for empathy and sharing. Sometimes the greatest wealth comes from the smallest actions. Love is the only treasure that can change destiny and bind distant souls into a family. Note: the story above is entirely fictional. Character names, locations, and incidents have been created for the purpose of illustrating an educational and artistic message. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental.